And you are rolling.
Great. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Introduction to the Prevailing Wage Act for Broadband webinar. I probably know many of you, but I'm Devon Braunstein, Director of the Illinois Office of Broadband within DCEO, joined by my colleague, Craig Colbrook, who is the Deputy General Counsel over at DCEO and our resident in-house Prevailing Wage Act expert. So we're really looking forward to this webinar. We're aiming to treat this as kind of a foundational overview of what is the Prevailing Wage Act and what should you know as a broadband provider or someone who's interested in applying for BEAD funds later this year. So very introductory, and then we'll have time at the end for questions, as well as we want to hear from you about what can we do to support you to make this process as seamless as possible. I know that Prevailing Wage has presented a lot of challenges, nuance, uncertainty in the past, but we're really looking to start with a fresh foot forward here and support you as much as we can. And so with that, let's kick off. Today's agenda, I'll first provide some context setting and recap on the Illinois Office of Broadband and the BEAD program, might be review for many of you. Then I'll hand it over to Craig to talk through prevailing wage basics, common broadband project classifications. We'll do a walkthrough of the labor website to show you how you can find prevailing wage rates. We'll talk through responsibilities and enforcement, and then go into next steps and Q&A. So if you have any questions, I suggest putting them in the chat, and we'll be sure to cover them at the end of the session. A couple of objectives for today. So after this webinar, you will be familiar with the Prevailing Wage Act. We hope that you'll understand how prevailing wage impacts broadband deployment projects. We hope that you'll feel empowered to ask additional questions. You'll sort of know how and where to go to seek support in preparation to comply with the Prevailing Wage Act during the BEAD program. And we hope that you'll tell us, the Office of Broadband, DCEO, how we can support you in complying, getting prepared ahead of the BEAD program. All right. So I think many of you know us, but just a quick recap. Who is the Office of Broadband? So the Illinois Office of Broadband sits within the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. The office was launched back in 2019 with the launch of the Connect Illinois initiative. And we are here to make sure that every single household, every single business in Illinois has fast, reliable, and affordable broadband internet connection. So that is why we exist. Our full mission is to end those digital disparities. So we primarily are responsible for administering grants. Previously, this has been the Connect Illinois grant program, the Digital Equity Capacity Kickstarter grant program. And looking forward, we are gearing up to launch the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which I'll talk about in a moment, and implementing our digital equity plan. The second half of our office is comprised of community engagement managers. So folks are responsible for engaging regional champions, community organizations, and making sure that stakeholders who we interact with have what they need to participate in these programs. I'd also like to shout out our essential partnership with the University of Illinois Broadband Lab. The lab provides really essential capacity around mapping, data, research, subject matter expertise. So if you hear the Illinois Broadband Lab, that's kind of our sister organization helping us carry out these ambitious programs. So why we're all here, the BEAD program. I know many of you are deeply familiar with BEAD, but I will share a quick recap. So the BEAD program stands for Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. Illinois was awarded $1.04 billion to connect all unserved and underserved locations to broadband over the next 5 years. We have a couple of points about the BEAD program on the right-hand side of the slide. So NTIA, the federal agency who is administering this program, requires us to use fiber wherever possible. Although we know from a financial standpoint, it will likely be a mix of technologies once we roll out. We'll go through a 1-year sub-grantee process, likely starting this fall. September is what we're looking at right now. And then following the selection of subgrantees, folks will have 4 years to deploy broadband. So end-to-end, a 5-year program. This is the high-level timeline of all of the milestones related to BEAD. And I know a lot of you have kind of been along for the ride along this journey. It's impressive to see that we are, moving towards that subgrantee selection, meeting all those NTIA requirements. So we first published a 5-year action plan, kind of charting out what the next 5 years looks like at a high level. That was at the end of this past summer. Then we have our initial proposals. So our initial proposal, volume 1, laid out how we would undergo the mapping challenge process. So that was approved back in February. Volume 2, we are awaiting that final approval from NTIA, which gives us the green light to start our subgrantee process and kind of maps out how we'll go about subgrantee selection. The challenge process, this is another dependency to launching our subgrantee process. So we went through a challenge process, a rebuttal phase, and now we are in final adjudication, kind of finalizing our data set to help us understand where there is and is not broadband availability across the state, and how every household, every location is or is not eligible for the BEAD program, and in what priority order. We just wrapped up a request for input process where we published initial project area units. So how are we actually going to break down the state in order to efficiently subgrant out different locations during that subgrantee process? So we received feedback from many of you, so thanks for participating in that. And the next big milestone is pre-qualification. I'll do a shout out later. We have a webinar on Monday, but we invite any interested BEAD applicants to submit pre-qualifications to confirm that they are eligible to participate in the BEAD program and kind of get this step out of the way early on. And then finally, the moment we are all waiting for, launching that subgrantee selection process, likely coming in mid-September. And then, of course, pulling together those final grantees and submitting that to the federal government. And then we can deploy. And just a quick breakdown of what the subgrantee process will actually look like before I pass it along to Craig. So there will be essentially 4 different phases of this subgrantee process, meaning the process of getting the funds from the Office of Broadband out to internet service providers to serve all of those unserved and underserved locations. So like I mentioned, first we'll have the pre-qualification process launching as early as next week, where we will invite prospective applicants to submit materials demonstrating their capacity and capability to implement projects through the BEAD program. Then the subgrantee process will happen in 3 waves. The first wave, estimated to launch early fall, will include any applications that involve hard to serve locations and that involve fiber projects, all fiber projects. Then we'll have provisional winners and reopen the application process with remaining locations, invite broader applications, whether or not they include those hard to serve areas and alternative technologies. And then finally, wave 3, which is optional for the state, will undergo wave 3 to make sure that we're kind of capturing all of the project area units on the boundaries, on the perimeters, to make sure that by the time we submit that final proposal, we have a comprehensive plan to cover every single area of the state. So with that, if you have any questions about, foundational BEAD, what is the program, what is the timeline, throw them in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the session. But for now, I will pass it along to Craig for the main part of the presentation. Craig, take it away.
All right, good morning, everyone. I don't know where you're all joining us from. I'm in Springfield. It is a warm summer morning here in Springfield, and I can't think of anything I would rather do on a warm summer morning than talk about prevailing wage for an hour. So let's get started. Devon, thank you for that introduction. Like she said, what we're hoping to do is to give you a foundation of knowledge, sort of the basics of what prevailing wage is and what you're expected to have covered. It is a very nuanced area of the law, so we are not going to be able to cover every eventuality we anticipate that you're going to have questions at the end, that you're going to have questions as your projects get started. You're going to have to come back to us and say, well, what do I need to do in this situation? That's going to be part of the process here, and we're going to work with you every step of the way. But today, we're hoping to give you the basics. So we're going to dive right in. The Illinois Prevailing Wage Act, it's a state law. You can see the citation there, 820 ILCS 130. In this slide, we have the statutory language. You can read it if you want, but it's written in legalese, so I'm not going to bore you with it. You can always get a copy of these slides later if you really want to pore over it. But I do want to give you some context on what it says. It's a very simple idea. If tax dollars are used on a construction or demolition project, then the workers on that project should be paid a certain amount, an amount based on what people typically get paid for that kind of work. And I want to tell you a little bit what the motivation behind that is, because I think if you understand what the ideas behind this law are, that'll kind of help you navigate some issues as they come up later. The first thing is that we don't want any races to the bottom on these projects. We don't want different contractors to be able to undercut each other and get the contract, do the work just because they put in the lowest bid by taking it out on their workers. Part of the goal of these public works projects is to help people get good, high paying jobs. So we don't want to have any races to the bottom. And we also want to level the playing field between contractors who are already paying a good competitive wage and ones who may be less inclined to do so. We want all kinds of contractors to have an equal opportunity, an equal chance of getting this work. So we don't want someone to be able to swoop in and get every contract by taking it out on their workers. And the one thing that I really want you guys to understand is that all of these Connect Illinois projects are going to require prevailing wages. We put it in the grant agreement. It was in the NOFO. It's going to need to be in every document going forward. And by any definition of the law, these are public works projects. And as such, they are going to require prevailing wage. You guys are all going to have to comply with the Illinois Prevailing Wage Act, and we're going to talk about what that means. Can I get the next slide? Yeah, perfect. So what is the prevailing wage? Basically, it's what most people doing that kind of work make for that kind of work in a given area. It is highly dependent on geography. Cook County has different rates than Sangamon County. Sometimes you'll even see that different regions of the counties are broken out into having separate rates. I think suburban Cook versus city of Chicago have different rates. I believe North Madison County versus Southern Madison County are broken out. Also note that it includes fringe benefits. When we later on, when we look at what the wage rates are, we'll go all down the line. It's not just the hourly rate. It includes medical benefits, training benefits, time off, everything down the line. And finally, it is highly dependent on the character of the work. In other words, the classification of the job. An electrician makes a different wage rate than a laborer, and that makes a different wage rate than an operating engineer. And sometimes there can be a lot of nuance to what is the classification. We're going to get into some of that. The classification roughly breaks down into different trades: carpenters, electricians, laborers, operating engineers, etc. But there can be different categories of these jobs, and a lot of things that might be covered by a trade, like a lot of people who might be in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. They might have different jobs on a job site, and they might be entitled to different wage rates. Like another good example of this is truck drivers are broken out by how many axles that they drive. But an example that might be a little more relevant to you guys is there's electric power linesmen and electric power groundsmen, and we will talk about what the distinction between that is. The most common classifications on our Connect Illinois project so far, as we have seen, are electrical lineman, laborer, and operating engineer. Now, every project is different. Every project is unique. You may have someone on that project who does not fit into one of these categories, but those three are what we see the most. And I would say we see electrical linemen by far the most. Then there's usually some laborers on each job, and operating engineers appear uh, somewhat regularly, but they're the rarest that we see. The prevailing wage rates are determined through an annual survey conducted every summer and published on July 15th. It's conducted by the Illinois Department of Labor. There are some periodic updates throughout the year as they get more information in. Sometimes everyone who was asked to take the survey doesn't complete it by July 15th. So as that data comes rolling in, they'll do some updates. They are heavily based on the wages set by collective bargaining agreements, project labor agreements, and other, kind of documented things like that. And all public works projects must comply with the Prevailing Wage Act. A public works project is any project paid for with public money, tax dollars, in any amount from any level of government. So if you get a DCEO Connect Illinois broadband grant, that's a public works project. If you get 10 cents from your local county for a project, that is still a public works project. If you get a loan, it's a public works project. If you get grants, a contract, it's a public works project. The one thing to kind of keep in mind is if all you're getting is tax credits, might not be a public works project. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's specific. It's highly specific. But for our purposes here, in the context of Connect Illinois, these are all going to be public works projects. And you've seen the General Assembly expand and contract the definition of public works projects to include or exclude certain pet projects. But when we're talking about new technology, like broadband or like renewable energy, electric vehicles, the trend has been to include those in the definition of public works and to say that prevailing wage applies. So again, can't stress this enough. Prevailing wage applies to all of the Connect Illinois projects. Can we get, yeah. So we're going to talk about what our common classifications are on broadband projects. I want to preface this by making it clear that there's not always clear black lines of demarcation between some of these classifications. And, every project is a little different. Every worker on the project might be doing something a little bit different. It really can be highly specific. And one other thing to keep in mind is that a given worker on a project, if he works an 8-hour day, he could spend 4 hours as an electrical lineman and 4 hours as a laborer. And you have to break that out. So there's a lot of nuance to it. It can be complex, but we're going to give you some guidance here that I think should get you 80 to 90% of the way to where you need to be. And when you get those last little 10% edge cases, we'll be able to talk with you and get you some good guidance on this. So the most common one that we've seen is electric power lineman. That's a journey level skilled work in the installation, repair, maintenance of lines. The next one we see is electric power groundsman. That is more entry level, that is more assisting the lineman. You're going to see a lot of that same work, directly working on the lines, but they're more of assisting the lineman, sort of well, like we said there, it's an entry level job. It's more of the Robin to the lineman's Batman. Laborer performs unskilled manual labor. Think digging, moving objects, things like that. It's a very broad category, and there doesn't require necessarily a specific training or certification. So you're going to see a lot of different jobs on a job site that could fall into laborers. And then finally, operating engineer, they operate your heavy machinery, trenchers, excavators, things like that. The things that my son plays with in the sandbox, basically. Well, smaller versions of it, but yeah. it's the least common thing we see, but we do see that equipment used sometimes, and your operators are the ones who are gonna use it. So keep that one in mind. One thing that sorry, Devon, I faked you out there. Um, Generally speaking of these, your electric power linemen and your operating engineers are the most they have the highest rates, and we have seen sometimes that there is a tendency to a lot of our grantees say, just to be safe, we're calling everyone a lineman because then they get paid the most and it's all taken care of. No one can complain about that. And technically, that's true. I don't think we've ever seen I know we have some representatives of the Department of Labor online. They can correct me if I'm wrong. I can't imagine anyone's ever filed a prevailing wage complaint because they've been paid too much. But keep in mind that there's a limited source of funds here, and we're never going to tell you pay someone less. But there is incentive to get this right, and we want to break this down for you. All right, we're going to walk you through how to find the rates because I don't think it is always intuitive. So I am going to share my screen now to walk you through this. Okay, someone let me know if you are not seeing the Illinois Department of Labor's website.
Looks good.
Looks good. Glad to hear it. So, the way to get to the wage rates is you start at this laws and rules section here, conciliation and mediation division. That's the Bureau of the Department of Labor run by Bob Pirelli, who I believe is joining us today. Um, go down to Prevailing Wage Act, view prevailing wage rates, and here we are. The first thing you got to do is you got to pick the relevant time period. It's probably going to be prevailing wage rates, whatever the most latest one is. But sometimes you might need to look back at whatever the relevant dates were. So we'll just say for now, we only need to know about May 20th on. Then you can pick your county that you're in. And we'll just pick Adams County, just because it's the first one on the list. And here is the table of rates. So you can see here, you start with your trade title, and there's several to choose from, 2 pages and some change worth of to choose from. But you can also see here's your electric power grindman, here's your lineman, uh, here's laborers. You'll see that this is broken down by building and highway. And you can see it's a higher wage if you're out on the highway. Basically, I think this might be a thing where Department of Labor might want to correct me, but I believe this one, if this would come down to highway because it's that kind of outside, often along the side of the road work, and that is the distinction there. So you can see laborer, you can see the classes of operating engineers, things like that. So we're going to go through here and we'll just take electric power lineman as an example. Your base rate is $58.58 an hour. Again, this is in Adams County. Your county will be slightly different. Foreman gets $62.45 an hour. We can go down the line. We can see what overtime is, time and a half on Monday through Friday, time and a half on Saturday, double time on Sunday and on holidays. Health and welfare benefits, $8.76 an hour. Pension, $16.40 an hour. Vacation, not required in this case. Training, $0.88 an hour. Other insurance, not necessary. And then the add OT owed is not relevant here. So that shows you kind of what everything you have to pay attention to. It's not just the base rate. It's not even just for the foreman. It also designates what the overtime is, what the health and welfare, pension, and training fund you have to pay in are. So you have to get all of those things right to be compliant with prevailing wage. One thing to keep in mind, a lot of contractors pay into a local union's health and welfare fund or a pension fund or something like that, that can be paying into that can comply with the Prevailing Wage Act without breaking this stuff out per hour. That is, very specific and very complicated, but basically your contractors will know if they're doing that or not already. So keep it in mind, but it's not going to be too big of a deal for you.
Craig, it does come up on the certified transcript to payroll portal where they actually will put that in. And then on page 2 on the verification, they'll put down the trusts. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Okay, I think I don't need to share that anymore, and we can go back to the slides. Okay, so we're going to talk about what your responsibilities are. And I know we've got some of our sister agencies on the line, and we've got some representatives of organized labor in on this too. But we've kind of geared this specifically towards our grantees. So we're going to talk about what the grantees' responsibilities are the most. We'll also touch on what contractors' responsibilities are. But sort of the perspective we're taking here is how you make sure that you are complying with the Prevailing Wage Act as a Connect Illinois grantee. The first thing is that every grantee has to provide proper notice that the Prevailing Wage Act applies to their Connect Illinois project. You have to put it in all requests for applications, all requests for proposals, all bid documents, all contracts, everything. It has to be all the way down the line. Everyone working on that project has to know that this is a prevailing wage public works project. Generally, the grantees do not have to file certified payrolls themselves unless they are self-performing some of the work. If they're self-performing, and I know we have some grantees that self-perform, then they need to file certified payrolls for the portion of the work that they're self-performing. They're workers that are performing on it. But generally, you're contracting this out, and the contractor has to file the certified payrolls. Let's talk some more about certified payrolls. That's sort of the heart of all prevailing wage considerations. All contractors, primes, and subs must submit certified payrolls every 2 weeks. Certified payroll is a record of who was paid, how much they were paid, including fringe, for what kind of work. In my experience, Department of Labor will accept a lot of different kinds of forms, but it also has its own on their website. So the important thing is to make sure that all of the pertinent information is there. Can we go to the next slide here? This is the certified payroll that Department of Labor has on its website. And we will be happy to send a copy of this around too. If you don't have anything else you're using, this is as good as anything. A lot of this, I think, is pretty intuitive, but it's fine to go through it. Contractor or subcontractor information. This is, just who's the contractor, who is paying these guys, basically. Public body information. This is what is the unit of government that is involved. Public body has to be involved to make this a public works project. For all of you guys, this is simple. It's us. It's DCEO. We are the public body involved. I mean, you could also, there might be cases where you're getting funding from other public bodies. In some cases, some of our grantees are public bodies themselves. We've had school districts who do this. I think I saw that, was it Henry County might be on today to look at this. So that's relevant. You could put that down too. But if you are not yourself a public body, DCEO is the public body. And you can see in these big blocks over here. I'm saying over here, but you can actually see where I'm scrolling. You got your worker name, address, last four of social security number, and telephone number, and the labor classification. That's the stuff we talked about earlier. Electric lineman, electric groundsman, operator, laborer. Sort of in the middle, you got the hours worked each day. You will also see that it's got sort of on the top, prevailing wage, PW, an N for non-prevailing wage. A worker's day may be broken down into prevailing wage and or public works and non-public works tasks. I always get tongue-tied because prevailing wage and public works are both PW acronyms. So excuse me if I cross the streams there. But yeah, a worker in a given day could spend whatever, 5 hours on a prevailing wage project and 3 hours on a non-prevailing wage project. And you're expected to break that down on there. You can see total straight time hours, total OT hours, your hourly wage rate, your OT wage rate, and pay per period, gross and net. So that hourly wage rate and that OT wage rate, that's where you've got to make sure that you are paying them what the prevailing wage rate says and that you're documenting it. When I say you, I'm kind of more talking to contractors at that point, but that's basically where it goes. Now, Mr. Pirelli from IDUL just put a good point in the chat. DOL no longer accepts paper certified transcripts of payroll. You've got to submit them through the Department of Labor's portal. If I can share my screen, I will show you what that looks like in a vague way. I don't think I can really log in, but so you get to this Prevailing Wage Act screen again, you have a certified transcript of payroll. Right here, you can look at certified transcript of payroll portal instructions, PowerPoint presentation. I don't want to walk through all of that today. That's a lot more information that we didn't schedule time for, but we'd be willing to schedule another thing to go through this, possibly with our friends at Department of Labor. And then it's got some basic instructions here. You'd be basically creating an account, which is free, so that you could upload your payrolls to the Department of Labor's website directly. From there, the Department of Labor puts the payrolls in an online, publicly searchable database. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that on this database, the personal identifying information for the workers is omitted. So, we didn't want someone to be able to find the home address and phone number and social security numbers, these guys, and harass them or whatever. So that is omitted, but you can still see what everyone was paid on a given project. And this is the first place that a lot of people go to when they are seeing trying to confirm if prevailing wage was properly paid on a given project. They'll go to that database and look at the records there. Trying to see if I remember here, prevailing wage searchable database. I haven't logged into this in a while, so I may have my thing wrong, but
And maybe, so at the end of this, we'll talk about like what materials would be helpful for everyone. But maybe one is kind of a how-to document on how to kind of navigate each of these tools. So we have that documented.
yeah, and that can be because there can be a lot of tricks to that. There's a lot of these tools that you can use together. We'd be happy to do another presentation on that, but it can be a lot of information. So just real quick, I'm just going to show you a little bit about how this works. We'll just put in a county. Do a smaller county, maybe.
You
Still
might
not
need to,
getting.
I think it
Yeah,
pops up if you did the type ahead. If you just type it slower, it might come up.
here, let's do this. There we go. So you put in your search results, try to be specific so you don't keep getting hit with too many projects like I just did. And then here is all the things that come back. So we'll just do the first one of these at random. It's this blue icon over here is the actual. Of course, it doesn't appear to be loading now. Well, I'm sorry about that. I don't know why we're not getting it right now, but it really does look a lot like the payroll form that we just looked at. So here we go. There we go. Okay. This first page has just kind of the project information, dates, contractor, all that kind of stuff. And then you get down into here, and this is where you can see who it was. So you can see name, social security number blocked out, classification right there. And then here's kind of the meat of the thing where you see what stuff was. So you see your hourly wage, your OT wage, all of that stuff. This is a very small and simple one, just one worker on here, but that's okay. We're just kind of giving you a very brief overview of what this looks like for the searchable database. And the thing to know is that all of this stuff ends up as public information to some extent. It's all going to be out there. And when people are making sure that a project complies, this is sort of the first thing that they should look to and that they're going to look to. So as a grantee, as a contractor, you want to make sure you are doing this right and that you are getting all of this in. Another thing to keep in mind is a lot of times when people are checking for compliance, they're going to look at this database, and if your payrolls aren't on it, that's going to be a red flag to them because it's a question of they aren't filing payrolls. Are they doing something else wrong too? So you want to make sure that that stuff is in. Okay, we can go back to the slides now. Okay, we're going to talk about enforcement of the Prevailing Wage Act. And this is where my friends at the Department of Labor or the Comptroller's office, they may have some disagreements here, but I'm in charge. They're muted, so they're just going to have to live with it. No, so Department of Labor is the primary enforcement agency for the Prevailing Wage Act. Their enforcement is complaint-based. Someone has to file a form with the Department of Labor saying, I think there's a prevailing wage violation on this job, and then the Department of Labor will launch an investigation. They're empowered to investigate, to order the payment of back wages, and assess fines. They can debar a entity from getting state grants or state money. If there's 2 violations within 4 years, then they'll debar you. But note that sometimes they don't record a violation. It's for sort of a term. It's sort of like a plea deal. They'll say, okay, pay the back wages and pay this fine, and we won't record a violation because their priority, and this is rational, I think, is to get the workers made whole. If somebody was underpaid, they want to get them paid up and made whole. And it's not as important to punish someone necessarily. And we've also seen situations where I don't want to quite say it was like a completely innocent mistake, but where the person was underpaid just because the contractor didn't really understand what their responsibilities were. The Illinois Office of the Comptroller, their primary role is they will halt payments to an entity while a Department of Labor investigation is going on. So they work in concert with Department of Labor. When Department of Labor is investigating a state project, IOC will halt state payments on that project until the investigation is resolved. Comptroller's office independently confirms some facts, but it's not a formal investigation like the Department of Labor. Once Department of Labor either clears a contractor or receives back pay and fines from the contractor, the comptroller will release state money and put payments on again. The idea here is to put pressure on contractors to resolve these issues faster. The Illinois Attorney General is empowered to investigate and prosecute Prevailing Wage Act violations. It does it very rarely and only in extremely long-term, systemic, complicated cases. You can find these. They have some litigation pending on this right now, but it's really like the most high-profile, complicated uh, investigations. And then states attorneys, they are empowered to prosecute Prevailing Wage Act violations too, but I can't say I've ever seen it happen. So just want to mention your local state's attorney could get involved. Probably won't, but keep it in mind. And then there is our DCEO grant enforcement procedures. All of our grants have enforcement mechanisms, including clawback provisions. Those are clauses that stipulate that if the contractor violates certain terms of the agreement, they may be ordered to return all state money. We can also cancel the grant going forward, and just say there's not going to be any more money. We can pursue debarment on our own. We have a lot of other enforcement mechanisms. What you need to understand is that the Prevailing Wage Act is a term of our grant agreements. And if you violate it, we can take action against you ourselves. And we often will. Something else to keep in mind, and this is something we've actually pursued quite a bit. If we find out that a contractor, or especially a subcontractor, on a project has not been paying prevailing wage, we understand that you as the grantee, you may not always know about it. We have the relationship with you as the grantee. You as the grantee usually have a relationship with the general contractor, the prime contractor. You may not always know what the subs are up to. Um, so you may not know that they aren't filing their payrolls correctly or that they're underpaying someone. Uh, if we find out about it, we're going to inform you and we are going to work with you to correct this problem. We're going to ask you to talk to them and have them pay things up. If they refuse, we're going to probably tell you that you need to seriously consider getting them off the project. And we've seen some of our grantees do that before. They had a sub who was continually underpaying, and eventually the grantee just told the general contractor, get that sub off the project. We're not going to pay for that. You're putting us in a bad spot. Um, that's the kind of thing, that's a better way to solve one of these problems, if it can be, to solve it on the front end rather than go through a lengthy investigation with the Department of Labor or getting your money cut off long term through the comptroller's office. It's always better to work these things out on the front end for us to have conversations about it and figure out a good way forward. Because the thing is, we want this project to succeed every bit as much as you do. And I put it up behind me so I always remember, nobody wins unless everybody wins. So that's what we are trying to do. And if there's a problem, we want to work with everyone to solve it. We don't want to just have someone get rung up and get punished and lose money for doing so, spend 2 to 3 years getting investigated for it. So I want to spend a little more time here talking about classification because I know that is a big problem you guys have faced. Classification issues can drag on. They can pit natural allies against each other. And they're sort of worse with a lot of modern technology, like broadband, like clean energy. There's a certain rebar project that we recently learned about. When you have this kind of new tech, a lot of these classifications were decided on years ago, and these new technologies, it's sometimes hard to figure out how they fit. An example of this is IBW 196. I believe we have a representative of 196 on with us today, and Aldridge Electric Incorporated versus International Union of Operating Engineers 150. That is a NLRB case that had to go all the way up to the National Labor Relations Board to figure out on some of these projects who's responsible for what. What trade does this belong to? What classification are these workers? I'm not going to get into like what that case said. It's complicated. It's time consuming to get into all of it, but it's a good example that worst case scenario, if you must, NLRB or Department of Labor can decide these issues, but that's going to take a lot of litigation and a lot of heartache. on your end. It's better to talk ahead of time, to talk these things out. Go to your local building trades group and hammer out a project labor agreement. With a project labor agreement, you can set down in writing what different trades and different classifications are going to be. You can set up times for pre-meetings with the different trades to walk through what the project's going to entail so they can all agree what each role on the project is going to be. You can set the classifications, or you can set a process to resolve issues quickly without having to go up to the feds or to go through the Department of Labor. You can work all of this out on the front end. That is something I can't say enough. Work these things out with conversations on the front end rather than litigation on the back end. An example of this I talk about a lot is the Willard Ice Building in Springfield, Illinois. They recently, it's not too recent now, it's been a good few years, had a project where they were rebuilding their parking garage, and it included this new rebar technology. I don't completely understand it. And the funny part was most of the trades who were involved, they got a project labor agreement, they had the pre-meet, and most of the trades involved didn't really understand it either. But they talked it through and they worked out that this is kind of a new um, not quite experimental, but cutting edge. That's the word. It was cutting edge technology. And it was something that a lot of the trades weren't comfortable dealing with. So they said, okay, this doesn't have to go through the trades. This can just be done in-house by that vendor. And it just goes to show that when you talk these things out ahead of time, you can get to an outcome that everyone can live with and everyone can understand why they did it that way. So really can't stress this enough. Go to your locals, go to your local building trades or trades and labor associations and work things out ahead of time. It's there's probably some old saying that I'm forgetting, that doing a little bit of work on the front end is going to save you a lot of heartache on the back end. A couple final suggestions I want to know. Broadband, these are high profile projects. You should expect a lot of scrutiny. You need to get comfortable with FOIA. A lot of your documentation on this is going to get FOIA'd. We receive FOIAs or other requests for information about broadband projects once a month or so, more frequently than that even. You should expect people to be asking questions around the job sites. Everything is going to be on some of the state databases we've talked about today. And that's fine. You've got nothing to hide. Be open and honest about it. Understand that these are public works projects. It's public information. It's going to get out there anyway. And if you do things right, if you talk to us and we get all of these wage rates set, you're going to be fine and you'll have nothing to hide. So be open and honest about it and work with someone who's interested in it. Don't forget about certified payrolls. Again, I can't stress that enough either. Every contractor has to file them. And if they don't, that's a red flag to investigators. If someone can't even file the payroll on time, what else are they doing wrong? Like I said, DOL can accept different things, although it's really all trending towards, as Bob Pirelli said, it's trending towards you got to put the information in the online database. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Craig, for the really informative presentation. I'm going to talk through next steps and then we'll leave the rest of the time for Q&A. So a couple of next steps here. We are having a webinar on Monday at 10 a.m. to talk through how to pre-qualify to participate in the BEAD program. So make sure to register for that if you are interested in participating in BEAD. We'll drop our intake form in the chat to make sure that you receive up-to-date communications about all things Illinois broadband, in addition to our newsletter link. And then I'll also share this link to the BEAD landing page where we'll be kind of dropping everything. So that can be your one-stop shop for all things broadband. And then resources and technical assistance. So we are hoping to stand up some office hours to help you workshop which classifications make the most sense for your projects. You can ask more detailed one-off questions. Craig is available for questions as well and one-on-one time. We'll also be publishing all of these resources on our website so you can get them there. So we'll push that link your way. And with that, let's take questions. So I'm going to start at the top here, and I'll read them out, and then Craig will pass to you for your expertise. So our first question, our craft employees are governed by a collective bargaining agreement with the IBEW and CWA. As such, do we meet the prevailing wage requirement under the BEAD program?
You almost certainly meet the requirements in terms of wages paid. I can't imagine that IBW and CWA would sign CBAs that don't pay them correctly. But you do still have a requirement to file your certified payrolls for any self-performed work.
Great, thanks. Next question, maybe, oh, Robert, were you gonna jump in?
Yeah, I just refer each one of the classifications to be checked as to the certified rates. There are different agreements between the CWA and the IBEW. So just do a comparative of the certified rates because that is what is required. Okay, that's all.
Right, we have a comment in the 9 Northeast counties. There is no distinction on highway or BLD for laborers. I don't know if there's a question in there, or Craig, you want to comment on that?
I think that's just good knowledge to share. Thank you, Clay, for pointing that out. To demystify that, I mentioned earlier that laborers have different rates if they're working out on the highway or if they're working in a building. Clay is pointing out correctly that in the 9 Northeast counties, there is no distinction. It's just laborers. That's great information. I'm really glad he pointed that out.
Great.
All would be the proper classification there. Okay, it wouldn't be highway, it'd be all. That is how it is certified through the process of the yearly prevailing wage survey. So.
All right, if a company usually works 4 10-hour days, is there a way to still work 4 10-hour days without having to pay the overtime after 8 hours each day? It looks like Robert replied in the chat. 4 10-hour days would require 8 hours of overtime. Certified rates for most classifications require 1.5 overtime after 8 hours. Please refer to the posted rates for the appropriate county and classification. Robert, do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, the rates are certified, and the 8-hour day is what's certified. The majority of classifications have after 8 hours 1.5. So even the PLAs, and we've had this on various projects throughout the state, those PLAs do not supersede what is certified as law and the appropriate rate. So the 410s would require 2 hours of overtime each day, totaling 8 hours of time and a half at the end of the week.
All right, next question. If you are on private property doing an installing a drop, do you have to pay prevailing wage?
If I'm understanding the situation she's asking about, we're talking about when like an ISP has a worker going into someone's home or their place of business to actually install the cables directly, like, the cables that are directly going to hook up to their router or to their computers, so to speak, to actually put internet in an individual residence or place of business or something like that. If that's what we're talking about, then that is not part of the prevailing wage public works project. That is separate. Those guys are usually direct employees of the ISP anyway. They're not doing contract work. It's not public works. And so prevailing wage generally does not apply if I have the right idea of what the situation is.
Cheryl, do you want to confirm that Craig's interpretation was correct? Installing the drops, which is more like the actual construction to bring the fiber to the premises. So it sounds like the differentiation is once you're in the home, that might be someone directly employed by the provider versus the construction portion of it.
I
In parts on
believe
residential, Craig, the residential side for a home would not be covered. That becomes private property. So if they're taking it from the pole or an underground pedestal, that is outside of the prevailing wage coverage.
that's what I thought, but I was going to say that Robert might correct me. So,
I concurred with you.
well, no, I concur with you. You said it first. Um, okay, so yeah, those are sometimes called last mile issues. Last mile gets a little broader than that, but when you're getting to that individualized property, that's usually outside the scope of the public works project.
And maybe the group can kind of get together and confirm that. We can write out an answer in an FAQ so everyone's kind of looking at the same thing. So look out for that. If you are using grant funds to pay for the labor or equipment on private property, I'm assuming, Kayla, you mean, do you need to provide prevailing wage?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't understand Kayla's question there.
For the
Kayla,
most part, that grant is for the backbone, the fiber network. Okay, there are a few instances where it's actually on private property. It's usually right of way up until either the pole or the pedestal. So once you get into private property, if it's an individual drop, it wouldn't be covered. I haven't seen too many instances where they're cutting through private property to run the fiber backbone, the underground. So in most cases, the answer would be it's not covered.
what trade title is used for a worker operating the locator on a directional boring crew?
That's another situation where I'd like Department of Labor to jump in.
The directional locators for an operator fall within the operating engineers. So look for the classifications. There's legends for various classifications. The operators have 1 through, depends on the county, sometimes 11. You got to read in the legends where it gives you the distinction of what operating engineer 1 through, as I said, possibly 11. Okay, but it's in the legends, and it would be under the operators locator, working in conjunction with that operating engineer.
Bob, this is Greg Doss, Local 196. We actually perform that work underneath our classification.
But you're talking about, Greg, I'm assuming that the electricians are operating the equipment?
Absolutely, we are.
Okay. Yeah, it's under multiple jurisdictions, Greg. You know that. That's
Yeah,
why the PLAs are great things to spell out those things. And the other benefit of those PLAs are there are no work stoppages. So
yeah, underneath our classification, it'd fall underneath electric power equipment operator. We also have electric power groundman, electric power lineman, electric power groundman, truck drivers. Them are the classifications we'll be using.
I also see Clay Diet noted that laborers sometimes do the operating locator work. So this is sort of just another example of where getting with your locals, hammering out a PLA, where it can be really valuable because a lot of different trades seem to handle, or at least have experience handling this work.
Right. I know we're just about at time here, so I think what would probably be helpful is if we pull the questions from the chat and type up some answers and have a kind of running FAQ document on our website, so everyone's looking at the same answers, and we can ensure consistency and keep that updated as more generally applicable questions come in. Before we drop, I would love to hear from everyone. Is there anything, I guess, like how can we be most helpful to you? How can labor be most helpful to you? Is it office hours where you can kind of workshop these project specific questions? Is it another webinar on a deeper dive on a different topic? Anything you want to throw in the chat, we'd love to hear it.
One last thing from the Department of Labor, Devon. We are in our yearly survey, conducting it during the month of June. We'll compile all the data in 102 counties and approximately 60 classifications per county. And the posting will be July 15th. So there could be rate changes effective July 15th. Please review the Department of Labor's website.
And you should periodically check that website no matter what, because as I said, some little changes trickle in throughout the year anyway. So periodically check to make sure that you're up to date and compliant, please.
Great. I'm seeing having the FAQs up. Great. And then I'm going to put Craig's email in the chat. Oops. So I think DCEO will kind of help as much as we can. Craig's our resident expert. But Robert, team at Labor, it sounds like given the nuance and the newness of this type of program, having the opportunity to workshop with you and kind of give guidance to make sure that folks are confident in their classifications will be really useful. So I would say more to come, but Craig can kind of help route your questions in the meantime. His email's in the chat. And don't hesitate to reach out with any other suggestions of how we can support.
Yeah, Department of Labor is looking forward to working with DECO, and Craig and I have had a relationship and will continue to. Things have gotten much smoother, Craig, since you got there. And
completely by coincidence.
But we look forward to compliance and working with all the vendors that are awarded grants.
And we should point out, you've got a couple comptroller's office people on here too. And we talk to them pretty frequently as well. Can't say it enough times. It all works better when we talk ahead of time and we kind of try to work these things out amicably.
Great. All right, so more to come, perhaps additional webinars on specialized topics. And I would say in terms of the answers to these questions, look out for the formal FAQ with the kind of final responses and getting some updates in the chat. So want to make sure that we get you the most accurate information about the drops. So look out for that in writing. We'll follow up, and thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.